From James 3, 13 through 18. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his morally beautiful lifestyle, let him demonstrate his good deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter rivalry and selfishness in your heart, do not boast and lie against the truth. That's not the wisdom that descends from above, but something earthly, soulish, demonic. For where there's competition and selfishness, there is disorder and every sort of petty practice. However, the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, fair-minded, willing to be persuaded, full of mercy and good fruits, undivided, and without hypocrisy. And those who make peace sow the fruit of righteousness in peace. And from Isaiah 32, 14 and following. For the palace shall be forsaken and the populous city shall be deserted until the Spirit is poured on us from on high. Then the wilderness will become a fruitful field, and the fruitful field a forest. Then justice shall dwell in the wilderness, and righteousness shall abide in the fruitful field. The work of righteousness shall be peace, and the effect of righteousness, quietness, and confidence forever. My people shall abide in a peaceful habitation, and in safe dwellings, and in quiet resting places. Blessed are you who sow beside all waters. You may be seated. Word of the Lord. Mark, I hope it's okay. I added in a little bit from Isaiah so we could have New Testament in this as well. Here at the center of James' letter, he issues a call for conversion that is rooted in a vision of God's restored presence in his people that comes from this passage in Isaiah 32. There was to be a day when God's presence would be restored. And Isaiah says that when the Spirit descends from on high, everything would be made new. There'd be fecundity, flourishing would ensue. The wild desert would become a cultivated field. The cultivated field would become a lush forest. And all of this would happen because God's righteousness had been, if you will, translated into human affairs, specifically as peace and quietness and trust. James, who lives and serves among this new community following Jesus that we call church, James has seen this day, at least partially. At her best, the church provides a taste of this God-saturated life. And James has been there. He's seen it. He knows that there are things that you only see in church. Only in church have I witnessed a hardworking person of meager resources respond to the need of a homeless person who walked in barefooted by reaching down and untying his shoelaces and handing over his shoes. There's some things you only see in church. Phyllis, the mother of a close friend of mine who's from Portland, was in an accident many years ago. She collided with another vehicle. Both cars went spinning out of control, and a crowd gathered quickly as they began to climb out of the wreckage. And when Phyllis emerges from her wrecked car, she looks across, and coming out of the other car is a member of her own congregation. And what happens is they immediately walk to each other, they embrace, make sure everybody's okay, and they walk arm in arm off to a payphone. That's back when there were payphones. To call the police to make an accident report. That was back when police still did accident reports. But the crowd kind of looked on with amazement. There's some things that only happen among Jesus people. Right? The church at her best is a beautiful, glorious thing in this world. James has been there, but the greater the potential for good in any person, anything, any organization, the greater the potential for evil as well. You can't make a devil by perverting a dog. It takes an angel to make a demon. And James has seen the shadow church as well. I'm sure you've seen it because there's other things that really only happen in church as well when it goes bad. During my first year in the frozen north, I preached for a small congregation in Toronto. A friend of mine had been preaching there before and was just moving on as I moved into town, and the search committee reached out, and we had some conversations, and at length they hired me part-time to preach as I was going through school in return for a housing allowance. I had no idea at the time of how divided this little church was, but evidently there were self-conscious groups that had seized on different committees. So at the end of my first month of preaching, I waited for the check for our rent to show up, and it didn't. So I searched for the head of the committee that hired me, and he disappeared and came back with the check. The same thing happens in months 2 and 3, and at the end of month 4, the guy's not there that Sunday, and I go looking around and finally am directed to the lady who heads up the finance committee, and she says, "Oh, I can't pay you. That's illegal. You're a foreigner." So what's happened for the last 3 months? She said, "Oh, well, those are loans." There's some things that I've only experienced in church. And James has been there too, I think. So here, at the center of his letter, James begins to issue a call for conversion. But it's a conversion not like what we tend to think of when we think of conversion. We've grown up hearing these stories. You know the typical conversion story that you hear in church. I was bad. I was really bad. I drank a lot. I got in fights. I was with a different woman every night. And then when I was 9 years old, I accepted Jesus and was baptized. It's not that kind of a story. It's not this once for all sort of change. Rather, James has a different kind of conversion in mind. It's the completion of an unfinished conversion. He's speaking to people who claim to believe in the God of Jesus Christ, but their lifestyle lacks the winsome, morally beautiful stamp of the Lord that they profess. Okay? Double-mindedness is the problem. It's where conversion has been incomplete. They're trying to run 2 incompatible systems on their hard drive. Their soul is divided. They want to follow Christ, but they haven't really questioned and discarded the values of the world. And so James clarifies 2 distinct ways, 2 overall perceptions of reality that people can live within, 2 wisdoms, if you will. That's what he calls them, which govern human behavior. And if you take one of these views of the world, certain things just follow in terms of the way that you live. And so, on the one hand, there's this view of reality. James calls it the wisdom from below, that imagines that we live in a closed system. It views life in terms of scarcity. There's only so much to go around, and if I'm going to have something, somebody else has to be deprived of it. And so it's just natural that we need to compete, right? There's no way around. In fact, it would be kind of foolish to live within this world where there's only so much to go around and act in anything less than a self-centered way. It would just be setting yourself up to be abused. Moreover, within this world, identity is bound up with possessing. My value is rooted in what I have, in what I control. In the next chapter, same section, I think, in 4:5, he'll use the standard, well-worn word for this competitive, self-centered approach to life. It's envy. Envy, according to the ancients, is an ulcer of the soul. It's this gnawing pain, this sorrow, when one sees that another possesses something that one does not have. This view of the world and the twisted motives that it engenders, James says, simply tears apart the fabric of an otherwise peaceful, God-inhabited community. It drives people to work from hiddenness, to do petty, underhanded things, because having accepted such a worldview, it seems like the only smart thing to do, the only intelligent way to go. The shadow church is a byproduct of the wisdom from below. It's, he says, earthly, fueled by our own powers, twisted by demons. But there's another way, and James wants to make that clear. There's a whole different vision of this world, and it's a vision that begins simply with the reality of God that He's been kind of relentlessly bringing in to our minds throughout this letter. The God who's the giver of every good and perfect gift, the God who gives to all generously and without grudge, the God who gives all the more grace. And within that world, if you live under that God, there's something that we need to know. There is always enough to do what God wants done. There is always enough. And if we begin there, there's no closed system. With such an undivided mind, there's no longer any need for competitive grasping or scheming. We don't need to envy another person's prosperity. And a whole new way of life together, a whole new sort of community follows from this. We can risk interacting in different ways. We can risk being peaceable, fair-minded, being open to persuasion from others. We can be ready to yield. We can be full of mercy. In fact, rooted in the gift-giving God, we see actually that this is the only smart way to live. It's the only intelligent way forward. The wisdom from above, what happens when the Spirit descends and fecundity and peace follow, is something that's available for you and me here today. And with that, hypocrisy, shadow dwelling, they have no use. By trusting the Father of lights with a pure mind, we're enabled to live this morally beautiful lifestyle in the light. And so I ask, who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show it. Word of the Lord.